Vanilla World of Warcraft's gear was highly varied, as this was the learning stage of Blizzard when it came to itemization. Many items back in the day had the most random stats, or the effect was just plain weird. Here are 5 of the weirdest items in Classic WoW. Thunderstrike. What's the point of a level 58 item dropping from a level 60 raid? Nobody knows. And even for a level 58, this item's DPS is an absolute joke. To put that into perspective, another polearm called the Ice Barb Spear, which can be attained at level 51 from a quest in Alterac Valley, had a DPS of 53.9. And better yet, you don't have to go into Molten Core. Was this a joke? The item clearly had a cool concept. A magical trident that transformed into a shadow form or thunder form, which had its own unique proc, depending on which form of the weapon you are using. It sounds great, but in reality, even level 58s will pass on this item, let alone level 60 raiders and Molten Core. The weapon itself was jokingly given the name of Thunderstrike, as no one wanted to spend a single DKP on this polearm. It was either vendored or disenchanted. No one wanted it. A fun piece of trivia is that the shadow form of the polearm vendors for 12 silver and 96 copper more than the thunder form. So remember, when you vendor this item inevitably, make sure to use the shadow form first. It also had a 33% chance of dropping. So Blizzard clearly wanted you to have this item, but something useful like a sorceress dagger? Only a 7% chance of dropping from Sulphurous. It's such a sad case that a weapon with such a unique concept can be so fundamentally broken by the lack of base damage. Well, at least it looks cool for transmog if nothing else. The Magister's set. Before raiding, Classic WoW had its own item sets that could be attained from the 5-man dungeons and Upper Blackrock Spire. The 8-piece sets were jokingly called Tier 0.5, as they were usually not that good and didn't justify having its own tier. But the worst example of poor stats was the Mage's dungeon set called Magisters. The whole set provided 0 additional spell damage, crit, hit, or anything that would increase your DPS. You know, kind of important for a DPS class. The set instead gave you an abundance of spirit, intellect, and stamina. You could argue that you would get a slight increase of spell crit from the added intellect, but not much. A lot of people back in the day were fooled. It looked cool and it was the official mage armor set, so it had to be good, right? However, there were infinitely better alternatives out there for caster DPS. The set bonuses were also a joke. If you wear 2 pieces, you get the 200 extra armor. Yeah, thanks. I really needed armor as a mage. Raid bosses hit me for twice my HP anyway, so what's 200 armor going to do? Ironically, the 6 set bonus gives you some spell damage, but by that point you could have gotten way better spell damage by equipping the pre-raid best in slot stuff. So Magister's set sucks, don't get it. Vanquished Tentacle of Cthulhu. By the way, I've got the message, it's pronounced Cthulhu, not Cthulhu. Thank you guys for writing that comment. So many people have given me that comment, but now I know, so you don't need to write me about it anymore. So when we think about trinkets, we usually think of them in 3 categories. A base stat increase, B, a usable cooldown, or C, gives your spells or attacks a proc. Well, Vanquished Tentacle of Cthulhu is definitely a B category trinket, but spawning a tentacle that attacks targets is far from ordinary. Usually these kind of trinkets were half-jokingly put in the game by Blizzard, for engineers mostly, for example, Gnomish Battle Chicken. However, this was a drop from the final boss in AQ40, and this was for serious raiders. The tentacle did do some decent damage, to be fair, but only being out for 30 seconds, it was a little too short for PvE, but it did have some use for PvP for additional damage or zoning off an area. At the point where you are downing Cthulhu, you're already pretty serious about raiding, so if you want to spend your DKP on this or not, it's up to you. The random item suffixes. In Classic World of Warcraft, the items that drop were given a random enchant to determine their stats. These green items were randomly chosen to have bonus stats like extra agility, intellect, attack power, and so on. But there were also animal stat lines such as of the monkey, which gave agility and stamina, or tiger, which gave agility and strength. The animal suffixes basically gave you a hybrid of 2 stats. However, most of these item enchants were completely worthless, like of the falcon, which gave you intellect and agility. When would I ever need intellect and agility at the same time? And these were not bound to level or male either. This random enchant could be applied to cloth items. So as a mage, you could see a cloth item drop, then see of the falcon, and you know you wouldn't need to read on it anymore, just sell it to a vendor. The random suffixes were just so random. They never really had any rhyme or reason to them. Yeah, let's give a cloth item some agility. Like that's ever going to help a mage. Dalren's Tribal Guardian. The Dalren sword set are classic pieces of gear, and the main hand and offhand weapon are actually PvE, pre-raid best in slot for rogues, assuming you aren't farming Ironfoe or Tibu's Blazing Longsword. But those weapons had a really low drop chance, so most people would just opt in for the Dalren set. The main hand is nice. Dalren's Sacred Charge gives you a slow attack speed and extra critical strike with 4 extra strength. Agility would be better than strength, but it's still good. And then go to the offhand. What a joke! 100 armor and 7 defense? Why would a rogue or fury warrior ever want that? And before you say this is a tank weapon, check out the item's text. Offhand. It's an offhand weapon, meaning a tank can only use a main hand weapon, so an offhand weapon is completely unusable for a tank warrior. And what makes this sadder is that this is one of the only weapons in the game that has plus defense. And plus defense is the most important stat for a tank in vanilla. And a fast attack speed which is perfect. And they can't even use it for a tank weapon. Luckily enough for the rogues, having 2 set bonus gives you plus 50 attack power, which makes it worthwhile to equip. But doesn't it just make you wish that the offhand would give you something useful, like agility, attack power, critical strike, anything but armor and defense? Oh yeah, and there were also a bunch of fish that you could equip in your offhand. You know, when I was leveling my fishing skill, I always came across these offhand weapons where it was just a fish that you put in your offhand and it didn't give you any bonus stats. Kind of weird, but it's kind of a joke. So, this really is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to weird items in Classic WoW. Now, Blizzard really didn't have a good idea of how to itemize things properly, and obviously now they do. There really isn't an itemization problem in World of Warcraft right now. Blizzard is pretty sensible when it comes to giving item stats, and there isn't really much problems. Like, you never see like cloth items with agility and stuff like that anymore. But it begs the question, should Blizzard change this for the release of Classic World of Warcraft? You know, these items are pretty weird, and obviously objectively a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense. Like, why does the Dalren offhand have defense and armor when a tank can't even use it? You know, there's lots of stuff in the game where it doesn't make a lot of sense. And there is an argument to be made that Blizzard should rebalance some of these items and give it some use, like the Magister's set. Like, no mage is ever going to want a Magister's set. We know better now. We know that although the Magister's set does look cool, it's not worth using. There's no bonus stats for a mage that makes it worthwhile. The intellect, the spirit, and stamina, it really doesn't do much for a PvE mage. So what should we do with items like that? Do we just keep them in the game and don't change them? Or do we give them some useful stats? Do we change the stats around? Now, one hand, the argument is that is going to be a good thing, and we will have a better version of vanilla. The vanilla private server scene, if you go into any of those servers, you will see a certain class wanting to run one dungeon, because that is the dungeon that drops the pre-raid best in slot. But there's only a few specific enemies that drop armor that's any good. So you've got a big problem where a tank is never going to want to run Scholomance, because Scholomance doesn't drop any pre-raid best in slot stuff for a tank, so why would they ever want to go to Scholomance? You know, there is a good argument to be made that Blizzard should definitely rebalance and retune some of these items so that it makes sense to go into all the 5-man dungeons. There is no right answer. You could make the case that Blizzard shouldn't change anything and Classic is Classic, or you could make the case that Classic WoW could be made better if some of these things were changed and rebalanced. There is no right answer, and it really is up to your own perspective. Well guys, I have to say my voice is pretty terrible right now, and if you're wondering why I sound a little bit different, it's because I've got a problem with my throat. I have some sort of cold going on, so I sound a little bit crazy right now. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like down below and subscribe to the channel if you're new. This is Vaulty, signing out.